girls. There have not been any logistical issues with this election process. The present world government is absolutely non-corrupt and works with the intention of producing net good for global society. Next slide. Context 2. The world government finds the forbidden fruit, which is the instrument that gave human beings free will many aeons ago. The forbidden fruit can be used to program the will of every single human being according to the wishes of its user, and thereby determine the rest of humanity's future and the social order that they will inhabit. The catch is that it can only be used once. After that, it self-destructs, and the determined future can never be changed again. Motion. This house believes that the world government should use the forbidden fruit to program free will and establish a new world order. Happy debating, guys. All the best.
Just one confirmation. The prep time is 30 minutes or 25?
You get 30 minutes only, the whole thing.
Perfect. Thank you.
Anytime.
And guys, do not leave the meeting as this debate would happen on Zoom. And also the teams who are debating, please rename yourselves with your team, starting with your team name.
Hello, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm from Government Law College, Mumbai. That's why I'm wearing this t-shirt. With me on panel, I have Chahana, Diane, Karthik, I'm sorry if I'm butchering any of your pronunciations, Kshitij, Shom, and Tanaya. I would like all the panelists to introduce themselves, like with the pronouns if you want to. If you don't, that's also completely fine with us. So like you guys don't, then that's completely fine, I guess. Yeah, you can also alternatively send it on the chat if you want to. Yeah, so for the purposes of this debate, you could refer to me as panel, adjudicators, or whatever you see fit that is gender neutral. And yeah, so without any further, oh yeah, before everything else, like I would uh, just like to like introduce both the teams. Like on side government, we have the greatest emoticon of all time on WhatsApp with Jagannath, Kshitij, and Sarthak. On opposition, we have CNLE1 with Kushagra, Nidhi, and Ritul. So without any further ado, I call forth Prime Minister to open this debate. On the motion, this House believes that the world government should use the forbidden fruit to program free will and establish new world order. Your.
Hi, just confirming if I'm audible.
Loud and clear.
Perfect. I'll just do it. And
Hi, so sorry. Could someone please share the timer on the screen?
Yeah. Don't worry. Is this visible to everybody?
yes, it's visible.
Thank you so much, Prabhas.
Guys, also before starting the debate, please see that no one except the teams are writing in chat box. So please let the teams write in chat box. No one else should write anything in the chat box.
Also, just for the sake of confirmation, am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Good, thanks.
All right. I'm assuming I'm still audible. I'll just start in 5 seconds. All right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, understand we live in a world where half of the people die of hunger every year, right? We live in a world where there isn't absolutely any sort of like free will that exists in the first place, where like people can't live their life in dignity in the first place. Dignity is like majorly harmed, right? Please understand why dignity becomes like a very core element to this debate in with regards to free will, right? We think dignity like preconceives the human value, which is to say that most people can't live a life of dignity because there isn't like a free will that actually exists for in the first place. But free will is dependent on a lot of parameters. We think that the parameters on which like free will is dependent is like resources, hierarchy, the sorts of like household you're born in, the sorts of like privilege you have in the first place, right? We think all of it determines the sort of like life you live in, like the sorts of like availabilities and accessibilities of like information, all that stuff you have in the first place, right? Let's understand, right? This debate does not happen in the status quo. This debate happens in a hypothetical world where governments work for the maximum happiness of people. There isn't corruption and stuff like that, right? There isn't like power dynamic supremacy, people going ahead and like going ahead and like annexing other territories. That there isn't like any sort of like an external sort of like enemy to begin with, right? So the only problem that is there for the concern of the world government here is the people and their like problems, their conditions of living in the first place. At that point in time, we feel like it's really important for them, since this becomes a priority, right? This is the only priority you have to deal with. You don't have to deal with like political tension. You have to deal with like you being sacked out in the other movement. You don't have to deal with like GDP and all that stuff. You have to deal with what like how you can maximize the happiness of people. So literally the metric for this debate becomes a very utilitarian metric. On what side do you think you can maximize the happiness of the individuals? You can provide them with the amenities like fulfilling their hunger, education, and stuff like that, right? We think what essentially happens, like let's like go with the definition of what free will stands for, right? We think it's like the ability and your intention to choose between different sorts of like possible courses of action that you can take in the first place, which is like linked to your ideas of morality, guilt, sin, etc., right? What necessarily happens in our side when you program free will is two things. Firstly, you have like a now like a complete order of like free will, which is going to work in a systematic manner. So you have like further like much more efficient and effective way of having like a systematic control over the functionality of the world in the first place, right? But secondly, we think like people are now going to be much more coherent. We think the likelihood of people not necessarily prioritizing their self-interest above like the general macro level happiness for the people is going to be more, right? But let's like understand like why necessarily we think like these things are like important to be dealt in this particular debate, right? We think like in general, if you look even like in a world where you are going to have like the so-called like deterministic free will that you talk about, the problem then becomes is that most individuals are like self-centered, right? Individuals have their own intentions of what they correct find to be correct. They are working for their own maximization of self-interest. There is like a very hedonistic approach to what they consider to be like like correct and like all that stuff. Like what all you care about is the sort of like happiness that you can derive and the maximum happiness that you can derive on an individual level. And that is the only concern for you at every point in time, right? We can like if you look at like how annexation of territories happen, or like in general like the hoarding of resources, what like this points out to is the fact that there's like a fundamental lack of principle that exists in the first place, because this is like always like some sort of like a constant competition among people, because like resources are like limited, right? So you're going to always be competing on those sorts of like resources that are available in the first place. So even if you say like, listen, there's going to be like no corruption, stuff like that, sure, like you might solve some of the institutional problems, but like these are structural problems and like the individual problems and the sorts of like emotions and sorts of like uh, the sorts of like their conceptions of what is correct and what not, and like the choices that they actively make in the first place still remains the same, which is going to be like problematic. And I'll prove it to you why, right? Understand that like the reasons why we necessarily need like a world order is firstly because like resource distribution is like again like going to be different even if you're not going to have like sovereign borders, right? Why? Because the levels of prosperity within these regions, the sorts of like how those communities are living within that particular region, the fact like how these resources are limited, so, like sorts of like how like certain regions are like more prospered than other regions would still exist, which is to say that inherently human beings would still be competing for the resources. We want the people to work in a systematic manner. Why? Because that's going to ensure like much more effective functionality of these people. Why? Because we think that the likelihood of more social cohesion happens when we are going to have standardization or some sort of like a free will on these people. Because the standardization is to be good, right? Why? Because now like you can like actively go ahead and like let people know that the impacts are symmetrical on all stakeholders in the first place, which is to say that there's like a much more like coherent system of like these individuals having like a much more nuanced sort of like check and balance mechanism over the resource allocation, which is to say that probably like a person in the United States of America can just use like their air conditioners all day, right? But that has also like direct impacts to people who are living in say like countries like Indonesia or whatever in general, right? Why? Because you're actively contributing to the environment and like all that stuff. But the problem here becomes that you are like okay with doing that because you are like born in a certain manner, because you know that the resource allocation is very disproportionate for you and you can afford to do it in the first place. But we think like at a point at which you have standardization of free will and you know that like what really matters and what is the priority for the entire community is the maximization of like happiness for the community in the first place, at that point in time your self-interest take the backseat, because at that point the symmetrical effect and impact is still going to exist for individuals because you have been wired and programmed. And this literally will, if you go into like the semantics of the motion, you will realize that you're going to program the free will to these people, right? So that you can establish a world order. And I tell you why this world order is important in the first place, because even in like a hypothetical scenario there are still scopes of problems like competing against resources and self-interest being prioritized and stuff like that can happen. So we think on a more like morally and fundamental level this problem gets solved, and this is like literally the only problem. You might think like, oh, like what is he talking about? But this is the only concern that people have, because the external enemy here for the government, so like the world government here, is to deal with problems which are like regarding these sorts of like avenues in the first place, right? Because now your external enemy is the problems that individuals face, their conceptions of what's like what is like wrong that's happening to them in the first place, right? But we think like in general, right, what would like the world governments would want like with this world order? We think in general, even in like the world that opposition might propose to you, we think there are going to be like nationalist tendencies, conservative tendencies, even among like individual people on like not so known like geographical territories and whatnot, right? As I'd like I prove it to you consistently during my speech that while like resources would still be like limited and people will be actively competing against these particular things, we think at that point in time it's important to understand that this sort of like constant sort of like scuffle is still going to exist, and these problems would be like end up becoming like a very big like sort of like an issue that needed to be that would be needed to be solved by the world government in the first place. And world governments now have to like actively come up and like do something about it. We think the only way they can like ensure the sort of like maximum happiness for the community people, to ensure like the maximum cohesiveness and unity among these people, is by like programming this sort of like free will, which has like some sort of standardization in the first place. Because understand the existence of free will is going to like is like the main problem, which is something which is leading to most of the problems in like a capitalist world we live in, right? We think like on like a very utilitarian metric, we're able to prove it to you that why necessarily on a comparative our world would be like much better than whatever like the opposition is going to claim you, because it's very hard, because now they have to like defend two things in this particular debate. They have to necessarily come up here and talk to us that like why do you necessarily think that this is going to be not problematic, but secondarily they have to come up here and tell you that how can they mechanize that the world is still going to be like better off and they're going to deal with these structural problems in the first place. Due to all these reasons, very proud to propose the motion. Thanks.
Thanking the Prime Minister for that fine speech, I call forth Leader of Opposition. Hear, hear.
Hi, am I audible? Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, please understand that the whole case that we get from the government is essentially this, that there is like a lot of problems in the status quo right now. The problem is that people have free will because of, because there is people have different kind of resources, there is hierarchy, and that is what essentially determines free will. So now, there should be like a unified way of how people, determine their actions, right? And that is how they'll all become very good people, and that is how we are going to change the world, right? You just understand their own characterization, and let's talk about why is it so problematic, right? They themselves come here and say that the reason why different people have different kind of will is because everybody has a different background. They come here and say that people have different kind of resources, they have different kind of living, and that is why the will of a person, that is what determines the will of a person, right? Even if you change, even if you make everybody's will the same way, these things are anyway not going to be uniform, which is to say that even if like probably somebody who is really rich and what they aspire to do in their life, what are they going to be their actions, and somebody who is poor, what are going to be their actions, they can never really be the same way because of the because of the resources that they have, because of the background that they come from, and because of the lives that they live, right? We don't really feel that you're going to change the lives of the people automatically. You're just changing how they should be and how they should be the way everybody else is, which we don't think is even principally justified, right? Let's just talk about a few things first, right? Firstly, on the idea that you take away agency of people to be who they want to, right? Let's just talk about this extensively. Firstly, but before that, let's talk about who is this, the world government that we're talking about. What is this world government and why are they elected? We believe that the world government essentially is like, a group of like people, representatives, whatever. They're elected to, like represent what people want. They're elected to represent the will of people, right? They're here so that they can, make decisions, they can bring changes of what people want. We don't feel how essentially they have this right to determine what people should like how people should decide their outcomes and how people should decide what they are willing to do in their life. So we believe that is extremely problematic to begin with. That is like one principal justification that we don't really get from the government, right? Now essentially let's talk about certain things, which is to say that let's just understand that why is the diversity very important, and how essentially that is something, because let's just understand that as the motion says, this is firstly not reversible, right? You cannot just go back to how things are. You do this, you are going to stick with it forever. You're literally going to determine the future of humanity, not even like one generation or something, the whole humanity, right? Let's just understand this now. Essentially we believe that humanity in itself is something that keeps evolving. The reason why probably 20 years later the larger view of about a particular issue was different. Probably like years ago people used to believe in a different way about something, and now we have progressed with time, right? We believe that this is what is humanity, this is what is the whole idea of dissent and discourse is something that brings the change that we aspire for, right? We believe if people start thinking the way, if everybody start thinking the same way, that dissent, that that it's something that is going to probably lead to the change in future is not even there. And we don't really feel that that is something that is one way how humanity will evolve, right? Largely on that point, what happens then is that you make everything very stagnant. There is no evolution, everything is very stagnant, people think the same way, right? And also before let's talk about what is this will gonna be as it is defined, like as it is in the context, that it's largely gonna be determined by these world government people, right? You just understand this world government in itself. These world government are also like a democratic setup, which is to say that they are here because they probably got the majority of votes. They're representing the majority of a particular like place or something, right? We believe this whole idea in itself is very majoritarian, which is to say that these people in itself represents the majority, and now these people who largely represent the majority have so much power that they're going to decide the will of all human race. Like we don't understand how is that principally justified, what kind of changes you bring because of this, what are the like benefits that you get from this. Nothing like that has been told to us by Nothing like that has been told to us by the government, right? On the contrary, what is like the status quo now, which is to say that we see that as the context like says that the world government, is functioning, there is less corruption, election process is also regular, and things like that is happening, there's representation, everything. We believe the chance of any change happening, the chance of probably whatever they talk about, that hunger will disappear, people will become very kind to each other and things like that, right? We don't really see how, first, see that there's like so much subjectivity on what is the best thing for the world, right? Probably we don't see that even if you largely determine that people should be kind and people should be helpful, that's not how that's not how people's will is inspired, right? It's largely about very nuanced things which nobody really talks about, right? The whole idea of will is also like very subjective, and that is why the subjectivity of it is what it keeps it going, it is what keeps humanity going, right? On the contrary, what happens is essentially, just understand on our side what is happening. The world government is functioning, right? Election process is happening, there is like representation, there is probably like things are happening in a good way. Why is there like more chance that any change is going to come? Let's just understand, even if those people who are not getting represented, right, even if those people who are right now not getting represented, even if any kind of change that you want to bring, it's better on our side of the world, because it's literally happening. It's literally happening because people are gonna talk about that, right? People are gonna like make policies by that, people are gonna adapt to that, and that only happens when there are differences. On their side of the house, there's literally no difference, everybody is gonna think the same way, even if they believe that that's gonna be the best the best thing to do for the whole like the whole world population. They don't really firstly, like how is that gonna be the best for everybody, because the whole idea of how subjective everything is, how subjective even morality is, how subjective people's lives are, how diversity is something that is that drives evolution, and that is how things happen in the world and humanity itself, right? We believe that is something that is very problematic. Secondly, which is going to be dealt by my second speaker as well, is this whole idea of identity, right? Any human's identity is determined by the kind of will or by the kind of actions that they take. We don't understand that how essentially everybody like largely thinking wanting to do the same thing, wanting to do the same particular thing, the actions gonna be in the same way. This whole idea of people having different identities, people talking about different things, and people having different opinions, which is largely what shapes the whole humanity, which brings changes or whatever like policy change or whatever change to humanity that the government wants to bring. That only happens when people have like their individual identity, when people talk about things in that way, and that we feel is not even there on the government side, right? Also, the basic burden of government is to prove that why is there a need to even go with this forbidden fruit, where the context says that largely things are going in a good direction, right? When we have a world government, when things are happening in a good way and things like that. So very proud to oppose.
Thanking Leader of Opposition for that fine speech. I call forth Deputy Prime Minister. You're
Hi, am I audible?
loud and clear.
Great. All right, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The problem with opposition's first speech is that all they boiled down our case to is that we want people to be quote unquote kind and helpful. This is not the case that Jagannath presented. I think the primary problem that Jagannath identifies is literally what they like just say that this is the benefit of this world, right? Which is to say that the kind of world opposition wants to imagine is a world which literally depends upon individuals' happiness and individuals' own conceptions or subjective conceptions of morality, and like depends that okay, free competition and happiness all the time exists, and that will lead to some good things and some better things, right? Except like literally we live in a status quo, even though that this world is not status quo, but this like entire subjectivity of our own interpretation of happiness and morality lead to us committing these actions in the first place without us ever wanting to like hold ourselves morally culpable for the problems that we do like or contribute to in the first place. So what is this debate fundamentally about, right? This debate is fundamentally about our own relative conception of happiness and our constant competition to maximize our own individualistic our individualistic utilities. That is to say that this debate is fundamentally about, in a world where free will exists, you always constantly want to like compare yourself and your own intentions so that like your own relative positions as compared to somebody else's relative positions, and want to like maximize your own happiness so that you can compare, like you can in general be better or have more power or have more control over any kind of like say over resources as compared to any other individual. Think about all the problems that have existed in this world till now, right? Think about racism, think about colonization, think about like any kind of environmental issues that exist right now. Think about like all of them are premised on this notion of power, which is to say that individuals want to like have access to these resources, control over these resources. But why do individuals want to have control over these resources? Often individuals want to have control over these resources simply because they want to maximize their own level of like standing within the society so that they can get maximum amount of happiness, because of which your moral conception of democracy and stuff like that leads to like larger problems existing in this world right now which you're not able to solve. But let's talk about democracy, because this is what they want to like present their case on. We think democracy is the absolute issue, right? We think that democracy is the reason why people are literally suffering right now in world, because oftentimes people can't come up to a consensus. Literally like in this universe we don't understand like how is it legitimate for somebody who's like, let's say, rich and like has here like extreme amount of houses, who's making policies about what should happen about the poor, right? We think that this is the issue with democracy. You are literally voting on the things which don't even half of the time affect you. You're literally voting upon like what housing policy should be followed for somebody who is in a poorer background, without ever like experiencing what that person suffers through or what that person's grief and emotions are going to look like. But you're always constantly focused upon your own maximum happiness, your own like increasing your own utility and stuff like that. And if you believe that like your own utility matters, then this should be the only thing, which is why it becomes extremely hard on their world to like any kind of policy to be adopted. Because literally look at the world right now, right? Any kind of communist state, any kind of socialist state will always be under threat from capitalism and will have to act in ways so that their own individual like remain happier, because like all the capitalists will always be like, look, these are commie people, they don't care about your happiness, they don't care about like your standing in society, look at us, we provide you freedom. But the definition of freedom in the end of the day is still set by the capitalist. That is to say, the definition of freedom is always defined by the oppressor's gaze. And this is important because their opposition's world, when they talk about quote unquote freedom and agency, we don't think this is an absolute agency. We think this is disillusionment. This is freedom which is defined by the oppressor for the oppressor, not for the oppressed, not for the people who actually we need to care about, and not for the people who are vulnerable in this debate, which is why democracy is the issue, not a solution. But let's talk a little bit about what we talk about, which we did not get a response to. Firstly, like just a general clarification of what this world is likely to look like, right? I think that what this world, like number one, what are the problems that we face currently in status quo? Obviously, we recognize that this world is not going to have like say national boundaries and stuff like that, but that doesn't mean that individuals aren't going to operate in self-interest, which is to say that individuals will still want to like say want to maximize their own happiness, maximize their own utility by getting access to institutions, by getting access to greater amounts of money, by getting access to better jobs and stuff like that, without actually making all these trade-offs. And this is important because oftentimes whenever like this is the idea behind will, right? Because what is will? Will is intention. When you're making a choice, you go through trade-offs. That is to say, you decide which one is more important to you as an individual as compared to something else. What fundamental difference and uniqueness we're able to build out in our world is that we can program individuals' ability to make these choices on standardized metric, which is to say that we can now program like how individuals want to weigh over these choices, wherein like we would rather want individuals to want like to promote a utilitarian metric of happiness as compared to individuals' own metric of individual maximization of happiness, right? We think that this is the kind of like trade-offs that individuals are likely to make in their world, which is to say that if a person has to decide between a job which is inherently oppressive and another job which will actually save a larger number of people, that person will behave altruistically as compared to maximizing their own happiness, because we don't want happiness to be the primary metric as to how people decide the kinds of things that they want to do. But let's talk a little bit about the consequences, because they ask us if there are no consequences. I think this debate has many consequences, but we were engaging on principle because we recognize the principle is also very important in this debate. What are the consequences? Number one, we think that this world is less likely to be selfish and less likely to have any kind of institutional apathy. That is to say, people are more likely to participate in institutions with each other. People are less likely to be like redundant, like unacceptable of other identities. People are more likely to be happier with people are more likely to be happier with living with other individuals. Why is this true, right? It's true because we fundamentally solve this like constant comparison of your identity with another identity to maximize your own happiness. That is to say, we constantly place everyone in a single footing as to their own utility, and we believe that the point at which you're constantly like placing everybody at the same level of their own utility, you leave out like you fundamentally solve the problem of like setting definitions on the hands of the freedom of the oppressor, simply because that oppressor always does that because of the intention of getting more access to utility or maximizing their own utility. but that leads to many like other benefits. For example, you don't have people constantly fighting over resources. You don't have like instability within the world order, basically, because now you're more likely to live in social cohesion with other individuals and be content with your positions and in society, and not want to maximize your position to reach positions of power, for example. But let's talk a little bit about the principle, because I think that consequence wise we clearly take this debate because they don't have any consequence to compare to, right? They argue that, oh, our world, maybe things can change, possibly, but not probably, because in their world, literally what you essentially end up doing is that create all that huge pressure on the individuals who are literally hurt right now to like work for their own emancipation, and still the freedom is still defined by the people who are more oppressive. We don't understand why that pressure at the end of the day is legitimate at all to place on these individuals. But what is the main analysis that we give to you, right? We think that the existence of free will in the end of the day is always going to harm the dignity of individuals, which is to say the only prerequisite to any individual's life, any individual's existence, which is the idea that you can live a dignified life, you can go to like, you can literally just be a little more happier with yourself. You do not have to live like say in a homeless shelter without having any access to basic amenities within life. You do not have to live like, you don't have to go to sleep without eating basic amounts of food which your body requires very naturally and biologically. We think that these kinds of things are important for just living off a basic dignity life, dignified life, right? But what is the issue right now? Even if one person does not live a dignified life, we fundamentally commit a crime as a society. Because why is that? Because we don't offer them the most fundamental basic human principle of self-determination, of dignity, of choice. And this is important because in like this like fundamental constant access to free will always is going to lead to like people living undignified life, people always constantly wanting to blame themselves for not having undignified life, people always constantly wanting to like live in greater amounts of grief as compared to another individual, people disproportionately harming themselves not because of their own fault but because of somebody else's fault, and people always being at the mercy of the oppressors. Extremely proud to propose.
Thanking the Deputy Prime Minister for that fine speech, I call forth Deputy Leader of Opposition. You're
Hi, am I audible?
loud and clear.
Cool, just give me a second. Yeah, I'll begin with my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, the DPM makes the job fairly easier for us because when they come here and bash democracy and the problems existing within democracy, and then they select an elected representative and give this irreversible change, the power to bring this irreversible change in their hand, that is what the problem that we have with this motion, and that is what we'll be dealing with on, right? But firstly, on the idea of principle justification of this motion, let's very clearly understand that the elected representative is not the authority that should be utilized to bring an irreversible change in the future of humanity, right? At the first place, these representatives were not elected after making the people aware that this particular step would be followed, right? Hence, it is completely principally unjustified. Apart from that, the selection of electoral results to judge the sanctity of an elected representative is an extremely problematic metric to say the least, right? Because at the end of the day, free will is a subjective concept, and we don't believe that these people are the best equipped to deal with it, right? Because at the end of the day, let's understand very clearly that these people are also humans, to say the least, right? But moving on, panel, the more on the election or more on the idea of the world government as this part, and personification of the people who are ruling the world government, right? Essentially understand that these people who are elected from their territories represent the majoritarian viewpoint from their territories, and this is where our problem begins, right? So whenever they come here and essentially tell you about how minorities are going to suffer, that is what is going to happen in their case, right? And that is where we'll differentiate our case from their case. Panel, essentially understand that this enfranchisement of a certain segment of the territory, which trickles down to a huge as section of the global population whose choice of elected representative would not have been the same when in comparison to their majoritarian counterparts, would happen take place, right? Why does this disenfranchisement take place? Because the subjectivity that we talk to you about is completely different from the other people, the people who are actually going on and changing things inside them, right? And this is very problematic on two accounts, panel, because we essentially understand that any representative who brings forth a view of majority and goes on to implement that particular idea into the system is completely ending the idea of diversity, right? And now let me tell you that how diversity works in the idea of humankind and why is it so important. Essentially understand that diversity of opinion, ideologies and identities is what drives the evolution of humankind at all, right? So when they come here and talk about oppression, essentially understand that we have come a far long way in the humankind history of ending certain oppression to a certain level only due to the diversity that exists, right? We don't believe that an elected representative of a majoritarian election is the one who will be able to put forth the views of minorities very, very nicely, right? And here is where the point of identity comes into the picture as well, because let's understand at the core of it, when they talk about dignity, to say the least, dignity is also derived from the idea of identity that you have, right? And Taral, this is where we tell you that a person who might not identify with the identity of other person, or for subjectively who might differ on the idea of identity of that person, disenfranchises that person from their own unique identity. That is problematic in two accounts, because only if I identify with something will I be able to bring a change in the society, because I will be working with people who identify with me, right? But when I have a principled course of action decided by a person who does not believe and does not conform to my needs, then that particular idea completely goes off the picture, right? And that is very, very problematic, because we believe that in our scenario, on the basis of the diversity, the change that we are bringing in the society, even when it is gradual, it is looking to be much, much better than these people, right, panel? But panel, moving on, right? Again, on the idea of principal justification of certain things, let's be very clear about it, that you are necessarily giving the future of the humankind into the hand of a very minority group, right? That is a very few people of the world are going to decide what the humankind would necessarily look like, right? And they will also come here, and they are the one. This is the irreversible change, and that should also be understood, right? But at the core of it, let's personify these people as well, right? These elected representatives might be good when you say they're not corrupt and things like that, but at the end of the day, essentially understand that they are also humans, to say the least, right? And hence, when we believe that this elected representative from a regular election goes into the picture and does this, then the present electoral structure that is present in the territories would be completely destroyed, because of course this person would work for themselves, right? So when they come here and characterize the person to you as extremely selfish, and every human being is extremely selfish, they don't necessarily tell you that why are these people, the elected representatives, safe from that, right? And that is where we take the debate from them, because when we come here and tell you that every person comes with flaws that are there, and that is why they are not the one that should be deciding the future of humanity, right? But also understand that what does this trickle down to, right? This trickle down to extreme stagnation in the society. And what does this stagnation looks like? This stagnation looks like an extremely majoritarian stagnation, right? Because, for example, essentially understand that when you go through an election, the policies that you follow, you have been voting on, is what the majority votes to you upon, right? Even in a condition when you say that no, like, different people voted for me or things like that, a huge chunk of these people will essentially curb to this the majoritarian policies. And at that time, the stagnation that you are looking to achieve in your scenario, the ultimate goal that you are looking in your scenario, is going to be the same majoritarian goal that is being achieved in the present world, that you identify that they are the problems in the present world, right? But also, moving on, the idea of monotonicity that comes in with the idea with this particular thing. Humankind, we are not dealing with a certain person here, right? We are not dealing with only individuals, we are also dealing with humankind, right? And evolution is the thing. Evolution is something, diversification is something that drives the humankind, to say the least, right? So when you give the power in hands of these few people and tell them that you need to give me everything, that's a very, very utopian case, to say the least, right? Because essentially understand that the net good that the motion talks about, that net good is decided by the representatives of an elected representative system, who have been voted on by the majority. And that is why it is very, very problematic, to say the least. We believe that the oppressed are much worse off in their side of the house, because now they are less empowered to achieve the goals that they want to achieve for their community, for the simple view that the course of action is now being decided by someone who they might not have voted for. It will be extremely foolish of them to come here and tell me that these people are pious and they meet with each and every person of the community, and their views meet with each and every person of the community. And this is why we tell you that on the idea of disenfranchisement of these people, of the vulnerable people, and on the idea of destruction of electoral structure and principal unjustification of this particular motion, renders the humankind into the dangerous hands of these people, who might get corrupted in the future because of getting absolute power, which is not the case right now, because they have to fight elections, to say the least, right? Very, very, very proudly taking this debate panel.
Thanking the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that fine speech, I call forth Government Whip. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Loud and clear, yes.
Okay, still checking if I'm audible.
Loud and clear. Still.
Okay, okay. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, through the courses of two speeches, side opposition has just come up and said that democracy is good, democracy is good, democracy is needed. In their courses of two speeches, they haven't tell us why democracy is good, right? They cannot simply come and argue saying that democracy is good without coming and telling us in the very first place that why is this democracy that is needed. Secondly, their idea of diversity and identity is something that is what they've been talking again in their two speeches without the explanation in terms of why this kind of identity or why this kind of diversity that is something that is required or something that is appreciated. We get no levels of analysis into why do these things need to exist over there. But however, even if these things existed on their side of the house and they're able to prove to it why they're important and necessary, the most important thing that they need to weigh upon is the idea of dignity. The dignity which both Sarthak and Jagannath have emphasized in the beginning of their speeches, and also need to weigh on the consequences that we come up and talk to you in our parts of our speeches. But panel, let's take down the idea of monotonicity, which like side opposition has been running over us through the two courses of the speech and putting a burden on us at this point of time. Panel, we think that this idea of monotonicity changes the moment that like people are able to like maximize themselves in terms of like becoming better in order to not maximize selfish gains and in order to move in terms of a better happiness and in order to move into a better world where overall maximization of happiness is happening over there in this kind of thing. We think that like identities or some things are still being presented and you're not clubbing people into monotonicity in the very first place. What just happens is you're taking down boundaries that are existing, taking down nationalistic boundaries in terms of these kinds of things, because that's also an important amount of analysis. A large chunk of side government's case in this totality of debate has been gone unrebutted by side opposition in the very first place. They failed to engage with us on the other sides of our house. However, these two ideas of democracy and like identity over there are still more easily to take down in the idea of dignity. We think that individuals' dignity is preconceived for the human value, and something which side opposition also agrees is by the idea of which kind of different background do you come from and what kind of the idea of these individuals are. We think that free will is a major playing factor in these kinds of dignity, what these individuals are being talked about over there. Panel, let's understand what does freedom mean, because this is something which Sarthak spends considerable amount of his time in his speech to talk about these things. Panel, at best, freedom is dependent on the oppressor's definition in terms of like what the kind of freedom actually means for an individual in order to go and to move these kinds of things. We think that the oppressor is the one in terms of like who is setting these kinds of definitions in terms of like what does freedom look like for these individuals and what does freedom not look like for these individuals in the very first place. We think that like the moment you're taking away these kinds of world where these individuals are moving by the attributes of free will, where their own free wills are in order to maintain selfish interests and in order to maximize personal gains in a manner that they are taking down these kinds of things. We think that this idea of conception of freedom is much more better on our side of the house, because you're restricting individuals' freedom in order to maintain the individual's dignity and the individual's idea of like how their life is determined by a lot of factors in terms of how these individuals are existing their free will. Jagannath gives a very simple example in terms of like how climate change is being affected in the very first place, in the sense that how individuals choose to exercise their free will in a manner that is affecting these individuals in a much more unprecedented manner, giving the example of how using 5 ACs in a house in America affects drowning of Indonesian cities in the very first place. We think that there are tangible harms that are associated with an individual completely going and using this kind of dignity or free will in the very first, or free will of these individuals in the very first place. We think that an idea of using what kind of degree till what kind of degree you can use your free will is also a very privileged notion in and of in itself. We think that like the moment these individuals are exercising their free will in a certain manner, that they can go on to talk about that how what is beneficial for them. We think that these individuals are just working in a situation where they're maximizing their own gains, creating structures that are more oppressive in terms of individuals who are not able to these kinds of things. In our world of the side, we needed to just prove to you three things. Why is this world so much better, and like why is this world better in terms of like getting in existence? Secondly, why the free will of an individual is something that affects the dignity of individuals, be it from any socio-economic strata of the society. And thirdly, that what happens in the and that this is precisely the opposition's burden, that what's wrong in the weighing over the consequences in this case. We think that opposition does not do their part of it, and we're able to justify to you that why this world looks a still more better part on our side of the house. Panel, let's talk about the consequences that we're talking about over here. We've proven to you that in a world where like individuals are working in a maximum happiness, before that, it's very important to draw their analogy with like side opposition comes and talks about how there are individuals who will be in the majority and taking down decisions in terms of like this is happening over there. Panel, we think the current status quo in which this debate is happening in the very first place, or anything like the world in which we are living, not the hypothetical world in this which we are, is a democratic world. And the problems of this is like, again, there are people who are taking out decisions in the very first place, who are taking decisions on the basis of a majority consensus in terms of like these decisions that are being taken over there. And these decisions are turned to be like exploitative in their interest. And we don't think they're maximizing any kind of happiness of these individuals. At least on our side of the house, the hypothetical world that we're trying to argue for, that it is better over there, we think that the world has inherent benefits that are existing, and the moment you take out free will, you're restricting an individual's ability to maximize self gains, and therefore you're addressing the ideas of how these things are present over there. So the leader of opposition comes and argues about the ideas of dissent and like ideas of taking and the idea of discourse over there. We think that the ultimate end for these kinds of dissent and discourse over here is to maximize their own happiness, stand against these oppressive structures in the very first place. We think that the moment that you can go on to tackle down these entire ideologies, because this is Jagannath says in the very beginning of his speeches, that there are structural problems and there are institutional problems that exist over there. We think that even if you take down institutional problems that are existing in terms of nationalistic boundaries, in terms of like free government elections and everything, there will always exist structural problems. We think that structural problems then get better over here, because everyone in this, everything that is being determined in this world is being determined by the individual's propensity to maximize self-gain. The moment you're able to minimize this tendency towards having these kinds of gains, these individuals are better footed in terms of like arguing these kinds of things, and the ideas of dissent and discourse are less better, need not be there in the very first place, because in our side of the house, the institutions that are, or the institutions that are perpetuating these kinds of problems in the very first place cease to exist. And with this, really proud to propose vote for side government.
Thanking Government Whip for that fine speech, I call forth Opposition Whip. Here.
Yeah, if you could please confirm I'm audible or not.
Loud and clear, you are.
Perfect, thank you so much. I'll be taking few eyes in the chat. I'll try taking one around 5th if I'm not running short of time. Yeah, gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Giving free will of a particular kind without the will of people is the worst thing you are going to do to humanity and mankind. It's extremely unfortunate that in the 6th speech and the last constructive speech of the tournament, I have to take back the panel to the context slide, context 2 of info slide, line 4 and 5, where it is clearly written according to the wishes of the user. And here the whole side proposition case gets demolished with one argument when they come up and tell you that free will is decided by the oppressors and free will is decided by a certain class of segment in the existing society, and in this that is going to end.
Panel, what is going to happen in this case inside proposition? That it's extremely funny when they argue this, because in this entire debate, they propagated to decide and program the free will of people by one single entity, which comprises of humans who are legit not the creators of humanity. And you're giving the entire brutal power to that legit one kind of entity to decide the free will of entire humanity, that how they're going to behave, how the social order going to work. And that's extremely problematic, because you're just shifting the power from one oppressor to other class of people, which is going to do that, which is principally not justified, to give that kind of power to a single entity, which is not the creator of mankind, which is not the creator of you, and but it is just an representative who has been elected by a majority. And panel, understand, they fail to characterize, they fail to engage, they fail to tell you anything in the entire debate literally on the idea of majority operation, which is going to happen in this case, which opposition tells you repeatedly shouting in the entire debate. And that's how, when they don't engage with opposition, they don't get the debate. Understand that the government could not literally prove the urgency of using such an irreversible drastic action when only one thing is the problem existing in the front of the world government, according to the prop's own characterization, that there is no external issues, there is no other burden, no border issues, but the only issue is the upliftment of lives of people. Now, what this proves, that the government is incompetent government, because it cannot solve the problems, structural problems which are existing. The point in time they come up and make an assertion that it's difficult to solve these structural problems, they completely fail to characterize and mechanize that to you, that why problems cannot be solved. And the point in time when the world government shies away from that particular solution and don't tries to solve that, but tries to use a fraudulent act without taking the will of people, that since I have got a forbidden fruit, I'm going to use that for you, and I'm going to decide that how you are going to live your life. That's extremely problematic to begin with, which they come up and tell you very funnily. And understand, panel, that diversity is far more important than complete similarity for growth. To begin with, operation can be tackled with better action, but it's irreversible. This kind of irreversible act is something which which will be the worst mistake a government can do. The reason that when you take such a kind of action in the entire mentality of people, in the entire thinking of people, and their case is something which is literally against the entire idea of humanity to begin with, because the entire idea of humanity is motivation to grow. When you bring a similar kind of idea in the mind of every people by programming a manufactured consent in the mind of people, that you are having a free will, which is not the free will of those people, but it is the free will of only a particular segment of user who are using that fruit, you become very problematic. That be autocratic kind of idea which they come up and prove to you in the entire debate. Panel, just understand, when they come up and tell you that, look, people think about their own happiness and that's problematic. They don't mechanize that why that is extremely problematic. They just come up and tell you that operation happens when people think about that. The other side, where they fail to understand the idea that, panel, utility maximization is the reason why and how people progress to begin with. Understand and recognize that the own happiness of a particular person more or less drives that motivating factor to do discoveries, to do invention, and to do good for humanity itself, when that person is doing good something for their own life. Now understand, they kind of amplify the idea that what problems are existing in the status quo. The point in time they lost this debate very clearly is the point in time they come up and tell you that these problems are existing, problems of hunger is existing, problem of inequality is existing, and all those ideas, but they fail to tell you that why and how this government, which is going to induct a similar kind of free will in minds of people, how this is going to solve the structural problem of hunger, how this is going to solve the problem. So the problem, twofold problem with their case is that, about which they were opposing the operation and imposition of free will and manufactured free will by certain class of people, it is still happening in their paradigm itself. And second, they lost this debate when they don't prove to you that the problem which is existing, how they're going to solve that problem, because their ideas are not giving any literally tangible solution to begin with, which is extremely important. Now they come up and tell you that we want people to work in a systematic manner. Panel, this kind of forced fraudulent induction without the will and consent of people is not a systematic working of people. Rather, it is a pathetic strategy to use and to implement on people. So even if the government is extremely good, non-corrupt, and doing good, they fail to tell you entirely in this debate that why the power should be given to government to begin with, to channelize the entire humanity. Why that government is extremely should be given that much power to begin with, to use and to decide for the entire humanity, which they fail to tell you. Number three, panel, they don't tell you in the entire debate that how this is extremely urgent to begin with. Panel, the info slide, let's refer to that. The info slide again back. Understand that the info slide very clearly talks about that there are no such problems and it is legitimately happening, and the no like logistical problem is there and things are going proper. So they had the burden to come up and prove to you that why certain kind of drastic, irreversible step is extremely necessary at the status quo to begin with to be taken. We come up and tell you that it's extremely problematic for every particular stakeholder in this debate. To begin with, for citizens, we come up and tell you that this manufactured consent, which is being forced on people, is extremely problematic. And that's how they don't understand the idea, that how the idea of majoritarianism on which they fail to engage with us exists in their paradigm, even in more amplified and problematic way. They don't come up and tell you that how this kind of power should be given to the government to begin with, which is not the creator of humanity and mankind. They don't tell you that why change is not important. When we come up and repeatedly tell you that change is something which brings evolution, motivation, and in the mind of people, and the motivation to even live, because you need to grow, you need to and you need to try new things. When you are programming just all that motivation, so the life of humans in just become a dummy and a demo is being used and being run according to whims and fancies of a particular entity, even if they are good, even if they are God, that's not something which is principally justified, because even God cannot regulate the entire will of every single person according to their way, and that's become extremely problematic for humans to do that. And they don't engage on the subjective assessment idea that everything cannot be bad. Even if the government is thinking good, the other person and other segment of society can have good ideas and better ideas, and so on the idea of subjective assessment. No engagement on that. No engagement that why stagnancy and diversity is not bad. Literally, they fail to engage on the idea of identity crisis and how unique identity is extremely important. They fail to engage with us. They fail to mechanize their case. They fail to identify the stakeholders of the debate and how they are better served in opposition's paradigm. Proudly taking the debate and extremely hopeful that gonna win Kalinga PD 2022 as well. Proudly taking the debate. Thank you.
Thanking the opposition whip, I call forth opposition reply. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I'm Kushagra. I went as the DLO and I'll be going as the reply speaker as well. Give me 3 seconds, right?
Cool.
Hi, am I audible?
Loud and clear.
I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I'm sure that while I'm taking the speak now to speak the floor, we know that are already standing on your sheets, right? But I'll just tell you that why do we do so, right? The basic burden on their side, which they completely lose here, is not that only that this government will be using this forbidden fruit, but also that what does this government look like, right? They fail to engage on the idea of personification of the government, right? They fail to engage upon the idea of the demography of the electorate, and all those reasons they are completely losing this debate, right? Why do I say so, right? They come here and for all the 3 speeches they reiterate the same point and bash majority, bash democracy, and every such things like that, right? But in their case and their ideal scenario, they come here and tell me that these elected representatives have been elected from a democratic elections and now they will rule the world, right? And that is very, very problematic because they don't tell us that why these humans are pious, to say the least, right? Taking their characterization of a human, they are extremely selfish to say the least, and they will be serving for their self needs, right? And that is the problem that they had in this debate, right? But apart from that, they don't engage upon the consequences that we give you, right? We tell you about the disenfranchisement of a certain sector of territory, which trickles down to the disenfranchisement of a certain segment of the global population, people who have not elected these representatives at the first place, right? That is very, very problematic. Apart from that, we also tell you that how they have not been able to principally justify this step, right? And why these elected representatives should be the one to do so, right? To bring this irreversible change, they have not been able to justify. We have again harped to you about that. Even those people were in the first place not informed about that this step would be taken by these elected representatives, right? And with that being said, understand something else. They come here and harp on to you about the idea of dignity, right? They tell you dignity is that, dignity is that, and dignity is important. But they don't engage upon the point of identity. The whip clearly says that why is identity important, right? We tell you that dignity emerges from identity, right? We tell you that diversification of opinion, ideologies, and personal lived experience of people that comes out of their identity is what drives the change in our world, right? Even though it is a slow or gradual change, there is a metric of change that is what differentiates us from their case, right? Because they essentially come here and they tell you that basically we are going to put on an irreversible majoritarianism, stagnation in the history, in the future of the humankind, to say the least, right? And that is very, very problematic on different accounts, right? We tell you and we constantly engage in their case, wherein we tell you that these people are not, will not agree, might not agree with the policies that are right for other people, to say the least, right? And to the people essentially who have not voted for them, and even for that matter, who have voted for them, right? And they might differ, and hence this creates a lot of problem, because at the end of the day, free will, we believe, is an extremely subjective notion, right? And to give a human who is not pious, to say the least, who also suffers from the same vices that others suffer, who also comes from the majoritarian elected representative from the majority that you are talking about, and every such thing, then we don't understand that why is this particular person the one that you are selecting, because you yourself have characterized human as being extremely selfish, to say the least, and you have also talked about the problems that emerges out of majoritarianism. But also the idea of vulnerable people, we believe that they're much better off in our scenario, because they have a say in how the things work by the viewpoint of diversity of their opinions, their viewpoints, their ideologies, which will completely be evaporated from their side, because the stagnation that creeps into the world and monotonicity that creeps into the world, because these selected group of this minority group of people will hold the humanity accountable according to their whims and fancies, right? And due to not providing us a single principle justification, not even engaging on the idea of elected representatives, and on the idea of that change is much better on our side, we very, very clearly and proudly take this tournament panel.
Thanking opposition reply, I call forth government reply. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, great. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Two things in this reply speech. Number one, legitimacy. Number two, dignity and identity. But before that, what is the claim that the opposition reply speaker has made? They made the claim that dignity is dependent on identity. Think about it, what this means, right? This means that it's okay for two different individuals who belong to two different caste, class backgrounds to have different level of dignified life. This is the point at which they lose this debate, because this is again opting into the definition of the oppressor, which is again what we have been talking about, as to how in our world the oppressor always gets to define what competition means, what monotonicity means, what freedom means, etc., and always defining their identities on the basis of that. And let's see why all they've done in the all four of their speeches is read context. Really, I don't think that they have any clear mechanization in any of their arguments, but I'll still deal with all of them. First, let's talk about dignity, legitimacy. What is the main claim? The main claim is that people have been elected because of democratic setups, and that's why they have legitimacy over the kinds of things that they want to do. Easy response, right? We say that democracy sucks. We say that fuck democracy. Even if people have been elected because of democracy, we don't want democracy anymore. At that point, it's their burden to tell you what is the unique value democracy has to offer. They can't say that just because democracy exists, democracy good, democracy great. They have to tell you why democracy inherently is important, and they also have to tell you why democracy weighs over the kinds of things that we are talking about. But why do we say that democracy sucks, right? We think that the idea of democracy is always and constantly based on the notion of you individually defining the kinds of things that you want on the basis of maximizing your own happiness. That is to say that at each, there is a very interesting documentary by Adam Curtis, which basically talks about how your individualistic conception of morality have changed the political structures in the past, and how basically how larger industries have become bigger and bigger without any kind of accountability attached to them, because their own conception of like happiness and morality and competition always allowed them to have control and power over these resources. The implication of this is that when they argue that why do you transfer this power to this very small group of individuals, this power, like they are under the illusion that this power was at all people's anyway. We don't think power was at all anybody at the individual's hand in a world which is constantly determined by individualistic conception of morality and subjectivity and happiness. So even if we are to argue on this democratic framework, we think that power is never really yours. It's always about the oppressor. It's always dependent upon the oppressor's conditions and definitions of morality and happiness. This is also important because a large bulk of their case then stands out, is framed out, right? Really, because we also prove to you that like when this becomes a problem, we are only able to uniquely offer the solution to you because there are no alternatives left in their world that they can go to, which also justifies our basic stance that we have taken in this debate. That is to say, ends justify the means. Because notice that any kind of alternative in a democratic framework will always depend upon individuals' conceptions of morality. But the point at which individuals' conceptions of morality are always going to be focused on their own conception of maximizing happiness. Why will anybody ever want to live in a socially cohesive world? We are unclear about this. But let's talk a little bit about diversity and gradual change that they want to talk about. Right? First response: we think that like a large number of world, like the reason why even currently like people are living undignified life, and this is supremely important because dignity becomes a precondition for you to judge this debate on a metric, because dignity is the literal one like self principle that has to be guaranteed to every single individual, and if you don't guarantee that to every single individual, then you as the world government commit a huge crime, which makes it absolutely legitimate for you also to try and work for better conditions for everybody in the universe. But it's also important to understand that like this notion of gradual change in the end of the day will always be dependent upon the oppressor's gaze, because their democratic state worth will always ask people to work under the state, work with the state in order to like say engage with majority and stuff like that, and ask majority to vote on rights which concern the minority. But unclear how majority, like firstly, why is this pressure justified? Unclear, right? But secondly, this literally by the time you make decisions, how so many people have already died, so many people have already suffered, so many people have already gone through periods of grief. So unclear how you are gonna like why exactly is that justified? Why exactly is that legitimate? It's something that they had to answer. But lastly, we also have an unclear response from them when we question them on what is exclusivity of free will in the end of the day, because they say that identity is formed by free will. We say that this kind of identity is formed is always going to be dependent upon the oppressor. So this identity formation is not an absolute thing that they're arguing. We say that this kind of process of identity formation is better in our world because it's not dependent upon the gaze of the oppressor or a few individuals forming it. But lastly, they needed to be a bit more charitable in this debate. They needed to argue on the principle and not that these people will always be like working with bad intentions. Very proud to win this debate.
Thanking government reply for that speech, and thank both the teams and all the speakers for this great debate. I would like to ask both the teams to cross the floor and shake virtual hands or whatever. And yeah, so that's essentially it. OC, can we put into a breakout room?
I can or else it's better that you can go to Discord or somewhere.
We can give you a link. Everyone can join.
No, even Discord's completely fine. 1 second, so I'll see.
Yeah, so you can join, I guess, room 1, waiting room for adjudicators.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this final closing thing for Pratijja 2021. Right. So we're gonna start off with announcements for the top 10 speakers of this tournament. First, right. So, right. Can I get the yeah. Right. Cool. Right. So the 10th best speaker in this tournament is Lily Punia with an average of 77.12. Congratulations. Right. The 9th best speaker is Puhumi Verma with an average of 77.13. Congratulations. The 8th best speaker, Abir Bhattacharya with an average of 77.23. The 7th best speaker was Yashashvi Sarolia with an average of 77.28. 6th best speaker is Narayan Sharma with a 77.30 average. 5th best speaker is Kshitij Chauhan with an average of 77.37. The 4th best speaker of this tournament is Amog Agarwal with an average of 77.40. The 3rd best speaker is Sarthak Saluja with an average of 77.47. The 2nd best speaker is Jagannath Jha with an average speaker score of 77.50. And the best speaker is Shivang Seth with an average of 77.57. Congratulations to all the speakers. Right, Shantan is gonna announce the top adjudicators.
Okay. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. We have a huge tie at 5th best judge. Okay. We have 5 people at the 5th best judge. We have Tanaya Sahu. We have Onkon Bhattacharya. We have Vaishnavi Singh. We have Shreyas Chaudhary. And we have Adhiraj Goel. This is very unironically true. Okay. 4th best. Yeah, let's go to the 4th best judge. That is Diane B. Able. Next. The 3rd best judge is Kshitij Rao. The 2nd best judge is Kartik Mathur. And the best judge is Altamash Kadir.
Woohoo!
Woohoo. Okay, I will revert back to Suman for the finals results. Suman, please take over, bro.
Yeah, just give me a second. Right. So finals time, guys. Right. So in the debate between Emoji Face and CNLU 1, on panel there was Altamash, Chahana, Diane, Kartik, Kshitij, Shom, and Tanaya. On a unanimous verdict, the side and the winners of Pratijja 2021 is side government, which is Emoji Face. Congratulations. St. Stephen's College. Congratulations, everyone.
I guess congratulations to all the winners and Congo Altamas. I wish you would have come as an invited adjudicator, but I guess you were good as an essay too for winning the prize money. You got your priorities sorted. Okay. So now I would just like to make a small speech. Okay. Take a little bit of your time, if that's okay. Okay. So first of all, I mean, thank you all for trusting us with your money and thus providing us the opportunity to host you in this year's Pratijja. I hope we were a decent enough host for you guys, and sorry if in any way we might have made this 3-day journey inconvenient for you in any ways. But nevertheless, what's most important to us as an OC is the fact that we gave our best to host you guys and ensured a premium experience for you guys within our limited capabilities, obviously, because we are all relatively new to all this. But I guess we were worthy enough to be your host, and I hope you will join us in the next Pratijja as well. I mean, me and Nanjay might not be there, but I guess our juniors are probably worthy enough. I know it will be boring for guys, but I would just like to thank some of our folks here who have helped us in an incredible amount to make this event a success. So here are some names. First of all, I would like to thank our KSAC KiiT Student Activity Center Director Shyam sir and Anirudh sir. And I guess now I come to the people of the Chronicle. I mean, my seniors, my juniors, and my colleagues, and who are in the same batch as me. First of all, I like to thank Gautam Bhaiya or Gautam Ray, as you might know him. I mean, we actually got all the contacts from him only, and I think he graduated in 2019, but he was still there to help all of us. Since me and Anjay are his juniors, I guess that's why he is helping us till right now. I hope he continues to help the Chronicle Society in the future. And next, I would like to thank Suman, man. Suman, thanks, man, for providing us with all the course and all the IAs and giving us all the contacts and guiding us through. I mean, he was there at all times for us. I mean, he would pick up call at any time and he would call back and he would just ensure that we were just doing fine. And I think, okay. Next, I will come to thank Sant and Ariana. Ariana, I mean, thank you guys for doing all the stuff that you did for us. Carrying out workshop, making these stupendous motions, and guys, you were just awesome coach, and you were helping us throughout the tournament and before the tournament. And I guess, uh, I mean, thank you guys, all of you guys. And also, I would like to thank my immediate seniors, Debrun Bhaiya and Priya Shadi. And next, I would like to thank all the OC members. So first of all, I would like to thank Anjay, who is my co-coordinator, co-convener, whatever you call it. I don't know. We both are coordinators of Chronicle. Okay, next I would like to thank not in a specific order, just in alphabetic way, so that no one gets a sense of priority or something like that. Alok, Avantika, Avinash Rathore, Avinash Singh, Ayush, Hansa, Gaurav, Nirali, Nitish, Neil, Shivam, Shrutishmita, Vikrant, Vishwashil, and Yash, and also a great deal of thanks to our swing team who was there at all the time. They might have been a little late for you, but I guess they were always on time. They were active all the time. The swing team included Arnab, Shreya, Ria, and Aniket. He's one of the Gaurav's friend. I guess that's it. And also, I would like to thank myself for putting on all the hard work. And thank you all. Okay, now that's it. Nothing more, nothing less. Thank you guys. Please be here next time
Thank you
also.
so much.
Thank you, guys.
I would also like to mention one more team which we forget to thank. Like we had a really great equity team with us. Equity is like,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh man, I'm really sorry. Thank you, Akanksha, Ahana, and Avantika. I'm really sorry. It just slipped out of my. Sorry, I'm really sorry. I mean, the equity guys were great. Akanksha was really helpful. We had some equity problems, as you all know. I guess 3 problems, and they defended them. They handled the situation really nice and really in a peaceful manner, so that the situation didn't escalate to a further bad situation, so that things don't go south in our tournament. And I guess thanks, man, Kanksha, Ahana, and Avantika, who is from our DevSoc. And I guess we didn't have an equity member till the last time, and then Akanksha was, good enough, generous enough to take our offer and be an equity officer for us. I mean, thank you, man. I mean, each one of you were, a part of this successful event. You guys made it, man. Thanks, man. I mean, I know it's the last year, and I would like to thank all of you, man. You have made this my last year, I guess, my last journey for the Chronicle, an eventful journey. Thanks, man. That's it.
Guys, about the winning prize, we will send you the mail. So you have to fill the account details and all those of things, and we will send the mail. So and certificate too. So yeah, thank you guys for coming and making this event this big. Hope to see you in the next year also. Okay, guys, we will end this meeting.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we could also read the feedback from like if they want to tell us anything.
Sure, we will release. We will happy to like get the feedback from you guys so that we can do better next time, and like we made like this bit like late was there, but we'll manage to do that, I think, better next year. Thank you.